taxi. The driver, we're told, is working with police and his vehicle seized as part of the investigation. As we've heard, officers are now trawling through CCTV, trying to track what this man did next.
Detectives are yet to speak to the suspect in Tuesday's crossbow killing of 3 women in Hertfordshire, as he's still in a serious condition in hospital. Kyle Clifford was found in a cemetery in North London last night. The Prime Minister's told LBC his government has a plan to get control of punishing water bills. Proposals by Ofwat will see households in England and Wales paying an average of £19 a year more over the next 5 years. The regulator says that's a third less than the increase requested by water companies. Sir Keir Starmer says he has no plans to nationalise companies who fail to make improvements.
It does involve making sure the regulations we have are properly enforced, looking at possible further regulation, and something I'm very keen on, which is that sort of personal responsibility from the top. I know from running a big organisation that when there's personal responsibility at the top, it does rather focus the mind.
Well, the chief executive of Ofwat's told LBC that water companies will be fined if they don't invest the extra money into infrastructure. The Prime Minister's also told LBC that President Biden has been on good form at the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. Speaking following their first bilateral meeting, the Prime Minister said they reaffirmed the special relationship. Mr. Biden's facing political pressure at home over his health. And the Prime Minister hasn't ruled out an extra bank holiday if England wins the Euros on Sunday. Sir Keir Starmer says it should be marked, but he doesn't want to jinx the result. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 29 points at 82.23. The pound buys $1.29 and €1.18. LBC weather: rain for Wales and Western England tonight. A chance of showers in the northwest and along coasts in the southeast. Lows of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Very good evening. It's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. We're streaming this hour live on Global Player if you'd like to watch it, and that is because we have Alastair Campbell with us. Needs no introduction, really, does he? I'm surprised you're not still asleep, Alastair, given that you were, what was it, 96 hours you went without sleep or something like that?
40 minutes in 2 days. Yeah, that was not good. I really enjoyed the night, though. I mean, I was doing Channel 4, and I enjoyed the night for the obvious reason.
Well, indeed.
That Labour had a landslide. But I actually thought Channel 4 did a really good job. I haven't been able to see anything else. I don't know how everybody else did, but I see the BBC numbers weren't as good as they used to be. Well, it was
the first election since 2001 that I watched at home, and so I sort of flitted between some of the channels. And in the end, I went to the BBC, but then got fed up with them because they didn't seem to be carrying enough results. And then people kept saying, "Oh, did you see Penny Mordaunt's concession speech?" And I thought, well, no, I didn't, because they didn't show it. So I then switched, I watched Channel 4 a bit. I saw your spat with Nadine Dorries. That was very entertaining. When you had to resort to asking Rory Stewart for help.
No, I wasn't asking for help. I was saying, please make a serious point from the right, because this is just embarrassing. I mean, honestly, how did you see the bit where she basically said that Boris Johnson was working class?
No.
I mean, that was pretty off the wall. You know.
Yeah, I think I would find that difficult to justify.
Yeah, she wasn't there long. But it was interesting because, you know, Kwasi Kwarteng and Nadeem Zahawi were actually very thoughtful. And also what was really nice, Krishnan Gurumurthy and Emily Maitlis were doing the kind of stuff. But when we had interviews, we were just chipping in. It was. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought they did well. But yeah, it was. I couldn't sleep after that anyway. So keep going, keep blathering away.
And how do you think the first 6 days have gone? I mean, it's obviously too early to judge, I suppose, but they do seem to have hit the ground running.
Oh, I don't think they put a foot wrong. And it's interesting what you just said in your introduction. It doesn't sound weird to call Keir Starmer the Prime Minister. I think it was weird with Johnson and Truss and Sunak to some extent. But I think partly it's because people have been thinking this is going to happen. But also, I noticed on the night in the studio, we had a live audience there, about 120 people or so. And I noticed when Keir came on at his count, they were watching him in a completely different way. They were all literally hanging on every word. And I thought, just listen to your interview there in Washington. He just sounds more confident. And my column this week in the New European, the headline is, Keir Starmer is not a creature of opposition, he's a creature of government. There's no doubt they've started well. But, in the end, it's about whether you make the country better. And that's going to take a bit of time.
I was watching, Wes Streeting's been doing the media rounds today, and he's been on the media a lot since the election, and that's because he is a great media performer. But there was part of me that started to think, shouldn't he actually be getting on with his job rather than doing all of these media appearances? What would your advice be to him?
Well, I know the media round, as you say, it's like they put up a minister a day to kind of take on all the different media organisations that expect to have something done every day. Funny enough, I had a hospital appointment this morning at UCLH, and it was really interesting how many of the health people you talk to, the staff, were really excited about a change of government, really thought that things were going to move. And yet, I was just having some blood tests, and I got a sense of just the scale of it. The place was overwhelmed. There were so many people there trying to get blood tests, and the system broke down. And yeah, I think, look, Wes is a good communicator. I think what he's trying to communicate at the moment is the scale of the problem. So he's talking about, the NHS is wrecked, the NHS is broken, the Tories have broken it. And I think that's a way of sort of framing there is going to have to be a big change coming down the track.
Is it partly to lower expectations as well?
Yeah.
Because I think that there was this feeling before the election or during the election campaign that, well, we just need to elect Labour and everything will change overnight. And of course it won't.
Well, life isn't like that, is it? I think what has changed very quickly is the tone of government, and I think that's important. I think the fact that in his press conference of the weekend, the first thing Keir said was he'd been talking to the Standards and Ethics Commissioner. I think that was really important. I think the fact that he went off to the Four Nations, went to Scotland, went to Wales, went to the Northern Ireland, met the First Ministers. I was talking to John Swinney at the Germany-Scotland game in Munich, and he was saying, it's been horrific dealing with a government, a UK government that you feel is a hostile force that doesn't like you, doesn't want to talk to you. So that kind of tonal stuff I think is really important. And then we'll see, I think I thought Rachel Reeves' first speech was good. This focus on growth and housing and planning is interesting. But the King's speech is going to be when we actually see the framing of a manifesto morphing into a government programme. And that's when we'll start to see, what the real priorities are.
If you've got questions for Alastair, the number to call, 0345 6060 973. We'll come back to general politics in a moment. But I want to talk about these two books, one of them which is just out now. It's called Alastair Campbell Talks Politics, Q&As and Interviews and More. And then another one in a series called Little Experts, Alastair Campbell, Why Politics Matters. Both of these aimed at children. Mm-hmm. Why have you wanted to write two books aimed at children? Well,
the bigger one there, the hardback, is for primary schools, and the other one's for teenagers and young adults. I think we've got a real problem in this country. I think I'm really, really happy Labour won, but 40% of people eligible to vote didn't vote. As you said earlier, a lot of people don't know. They know next to nothing about politics. You've even got MPs, I'm not criticising them, you've got young MPs starting this week, who are now going to be finding out about how the legislative system actually works. So what the books are, they're attempts to explain it, obviously for primary school kids and teenagers, in very accessible language, what actually happens. When, I'm always amazed, I'm sure you are as well, whenever somebody gets a knighthood and they talk about, they can't believe that the Queen/King, took the time to do it. It's the government doing it, explaining what the role of the King actually is, explaining what the House of Lords actually does, explaining how you take a plan in opposition and turn it into government legislation. But then also in both of the books, more so the one for teenagers, explain how you get involved. And you don't, for example, voter registration, nightmare. You can register to vote from 16, even before Labour have lowered the voting age. So it's really just about trying to explain that politics is interesting, that it's fun, that it can be fun, and above all, that it matters. And actually, the primary school book, I went to my own children who are now in their 30s, all in their 30s now, and I went to... Yeah, I know, it's just balmy. It's horrific. Yeah, I'm 67 here and it's really not good. So I went, but I launched the book in the primary school that they went to in Gospel Oak, and it was unbelievable. These kids were so bright and they were so engaged and interested. I had one kid, aged 8, explaining to me why we had to increase defence spending. And he was talking about, we don't have ammunition to fight the Russians. Now, okay, we don't necessarily want to fight the Russians, but he was on the ball. Yeah. And I just think that what I worry about is that once kids grow up and then they get, their parents probably are quite cynical, the media's very cynical. So I'm trying to sort of get the message out that politics matters. Everything they care about, there's a political element to it. And I know that, I'm preaching to converted because I know that that's what you think as well.
Well, it is. I remember in, I think, 2000, so nearly 25 years ago, publishing a children's politics book that a woman in New Zealand had written. Mm-hmm. And it was called Jim Bleat for Prime Minister, and it's about a sheep becoming Prime Minister.
Okay. Fiction or non-fiction? Or a bit of both?
It was fiction. But I saw it at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and I thought, I've got to publish this. So I bought the rights, printed quite a few thousand copies, thinking that every primary school in the country would want to get hold of this book. But they were too frightened to talk about politics to kids.
Yeah.
And it was a complete... And I did an audiobook of it. I got people like Theresa Gorman, John Redwood, to read chapters. So you had John Redwood going...
Being a sheep.
Bah. Oh, it's hilarious. And I still got some of the audiobooks. But in fact, did you write...
I might have done.
I might have got you to do
I think I did,
chapter.
yeah. I think I do. I remember it. I definitely remember it.
But it was one of those things where I thought, what a brilliant idea. And it was a complete flop.
Yeah, but this point you make about schools being scared, that's what we've got to break down. Listen, I would love it if, and I know primary schools have been on to me asking for the book, and I'd love it if we got politics onto the primary school curriculum. Not politics, vote Labour, vote Tory, but politics, what it is, how it works, what the government is, what a minister is, what a bill is, what an act is, all the just really simple stuff. And what I find with kids is that when you explain it, they get it so quickly. But if they've gone through school, unless you do politics A level, there's next to no politics in school. And this thing about, we've just interviewed Lisa Nandy for the Rest is Politics. And I don't know if you saw the speech she made to staff at the DCMS, where she said the days of the culture war are over. And thank God for that. So I actually think now there will be the space to say, look, there's nothing wrong with talking to kids about politics. You're not trying to radicalise them. You're not trying to politicise them. You're trying to engage them in a sense of civic conversation. Yeah. And I think that's what we've lost. And a change of government is great, but it's not going to be enough to transform, the way that politics has gone and the way that politics is seen.
I know you do a lot of speaking in schools. I do a bit. Probably I ought to do more, but I was always quite reticent because I never thought I would get the tone right.
Yeah.
But every school I go to, I'm slightly nervous. I don't get nervous normally about standing up in front of a crowd, but it's a crowd of like 150 16 to 18-year-olds, or sometimes 11 to 18-year-olds, and that is a real challenge to get the pitch right. I come out feeling really inspired and hopeful for the future.
Absolutely. I've never been to school and not come out thinking, I really enjoyed that and I got something out of it, but including the one I did the other day. And, I'll tell you something else, the other thing that inspired me to get into this was I was doing a talk in... we talked about my last book, What Can I Do?, which is about activism, and I was doing a talk about that in a school. And this girl, she was about 14, and she said, has politics always been as bad as this? And her friends all laughed because they thought it was, young woman having a go at this old bloke who's coming to tell them why politics matters. I had a really long chat with her afterwards. She was really upset about that. She said her first political memory was her parents rang about Brexit. The only prime ministers of which she had actual knowledge were Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. The only foreign affairs figures she knew were Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So she said, has politics always been this bad? And I was trying to explain to her, no, but it will be this bad unless people who are good go into it. So, and there's, the pink book. Do you like my pink jacket there on the cover? No. Do you know why it's pink though?
Are you trying to tell us something?
No, I'm not trying to tell you something, Ian. Come on, you're a political geek. Why do you think?
I've no idea.
Because it's the only main colour that's never been used by a political party as a primary colour. There you go.
And it should also be the only colour that footballers should never wear as football shirts.
Do you think so?
I think pink football strips.
What about
horrible.
That French team that play in pink, the rugby team? They look pretty hard.
I do rugby.
Are you being pinkist?
I am being pinkist.
Anyway, there's a quote in there from a girl called Annabelle Fox, who, and this is the other thing you say about you get things out of these. So, Clacton, right? Well, been in the news recently because of Nigel Farage. Do you remember on one of the anniversaries of the Brexit referendum, BBC Question Time did an episode in Clacton, the most Brexit part of the country.
Yeah, I remember not feeling very enthused by that programme.
Okay, well, 100% of the audience voted leave. And
so they said.
Well, I was the only Remainer in the room. En route, I went to a school, and I've quoted this girl called Annabelle, because I said to her on the way, I said, listen, I'm doing this programme tonight with all your parents, and everybody's voted leave, and I'm going to be the only Remainer in the room. How should I deal with them? And she came up with this phrase, she said, persuade without judgment. I thought it was brilliant. Right, and then that's a kid, lives in Jayrick, one of the toughest areas in the country. So I'm with you. I think
actually, I do remember watching that now and thinking how restrained you were, because normally on Question Time or other programmes like that, when you're talking Brexit, you've got that glint in your eye, and you can't quite stop yourself.
I can't,
but you did then.
I did, and I remember I got a round of applause by saying to them, and this was her in my head. I said, look, I don't blame you for voting for Brexit, because you were given reasons to vote Brexit and you felt reasons to vote Brexit, but I'm sorry, you were lied to. And they applauded. So I think, I just feel with kids that, look, some of them will never be interested, but I think they're engaged. And what I'm trying to do with the books is to explain to them that politics isn't just about politicians, it's about protest, it's about writing, it's about media, it's about charity, it's about campaigning. And I give examples of, individuals who've made a difference, whether it's Marcus Rashford during COVID or Greta Thunberg or, Gina Martin, who got the upskirting law brought in within a year of something bad happening to her. So I just think that I'm really happy that there's a new government. I'm glad to see the back of the Tories. I think this government will be pretty good. But I think it's going to take a lot more than a government to get politics back where it needs to be. It's going to take a new generation to want to be part of it.
Is there part of you that would want to be part of it?
You mean like you? I think you and I...
It's an itch that sometimes needs to be scratched.
Yeah, well, I scratch it all the time. And listen, you've been very, very consistent in saying to me that you think my life's been a bit wasted because I never went into...
No, I haven't said that.
No, but you know what I mean. I'm paraphrasing. But you always felt, I think, I should go into politics myself.
We got someone here. David Norris says, does Alastair regret not running as a candidate in this election? Would he consider it in future? Well, I mean, we have had this discussion virtually every time you come in the studio. Yeah. But there must be a bit of you that thinks, well, I'd quite like to be a minister.
There is.
I see Jackie Smith has become a minister. Why can't I?
I know. Look, I get it, and I do feel that, and I do have the itch. Funny enough, I was at an event earlier today or yesterday where somebody said, you've seen Patrick Vallance, James Timpson going to be prisons minister, Darzai coming back to do the health reforms, Alan Milburn, they're talking about coming back to help West Streeting. Isn't there a part of you that would like to be in that mix? And there is, but it's not an overwhelming part of me. I'm very, 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 very lucky and very, very fortunate. I know most of the key people. I can talk to them. I can have ideas. I feel that my ideas get listened to. But I've said to you before that the time never felt right. And I've now got a very different sort of life that I enjoy, and I feel I can make a difference in a different way. But yeah.
And you're making pots of money from your podcast.
Well, I mean, that was not the purpose. It wasn't, honestly. I had no idea that podcasts could make money. And I'm embarrassed.
Some still don't.
Don't they? Well, you've got to get a new partner now.
I know. Right.
I know. No, they've been, anyway, the podcast.
Somebody suggested that you should get rid of Rory and we should combine the two podcasts. It could be sort of The Rest Is Many.
The Rest Is Many doesn't quite work, does it? No, The Rest Is the Few. I think that'd be a bit harsh to get rid of Rory. I think that, look, Ian, I'm sure you and I could do a very good job together, but...
Well, you did ask me to do it, if you remember.
I did. You were on the list. You were on the list. And I think there's something about... I don't fully understand it, but like I came down I was on the tube earlier today, 5 people in the carriage. 3 said they were actually listening to the podcast.
That's really weird, isn't it, when people do that?
Yeah.
I've had that before.
Yeah, and the other is to just love your podcast. Now, there's something about, and what's really interesting, I don't know what your relationship with Jackie's like, as it were, off air. Rory and I, the relationship is what is on air. we're not going to go on holiday together. He's certainly not going to go to football matches with me because he's got no interest in sport.
That I think is the difference in that Jackie and I have become really close friends, and I mean really close.
Yeah.
And
so did she phone you up and say, I've been asked to do, what do you think? Or did she phone you fait accompli?
No, she phoned, well, without giving... I'll tell you in the break exactly why, but I can't betray a confidence.
Yeah.
But I think I was one of the first people.
Okay,
way before.
No, listen, Rory and I, we definitely have a relationship in terms of, the stuff that we'd say, a bit worried about this, a bit worried about that, but it's very much about the podcast. But it's interesting how it's developed because, we're very, very different people, very different backgrounds, different politics, different in so many different interests. But there's something about it that just sort of gels. I'm not saying we wouldn't gel in, but no, I think I've got to stick with Rory if it's okay.
Okay, well, I'll be forced to have Nicola Sturgeon instead then.
Well,
because she's on the shortlist and she's interested.
Oh God, are you having a public recruitment campaign? Yeah. Well, do you know how I got Rory? By the way, I asked my social media followers who they thought I should do it with. And he was overwhelmingly the favourite.
Well, he is the Guardian's favourite Conservative, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the favourite Tory of people who really can't understand why people are Tories.
No, quite, exactly. Right, we've got a lot more to talk about, and then we'll take some calls as well. 0345 6060 973. It is 21 minutes past 8.
LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
23 minutes past 8 on LBC. Alastair Campbell is with us. We'll be taking your calls in just a moment. Actually, let's take a text here. Gary in Rotherham says, Iain, can you ask where the Ming vase is? Is it back on the mantelpiece?
That's a great question. I was saying to somebody, I think that the Ming vase has been put on the shelf. For those who haven't followed the discussion about the Ming vase, so the Ming vase was this idea that Keir Starmer had this 20-point lead and he was carrying a Ming vase very, very carefully, tiptoeing across the ground. But if you look at some of the things that they've done and announced since coming into office, so for example, imagine if in the election campaign they'd done a big thing saying, if we win, James Timpson will be the prisons minister. I mean, the right one would have gone nuts. This is a guy who says that a third of the people in prison shouldn't be in there, and another third. Right. I agree with him, but that would have been a sort of a big thing. Imagine if David Lammy had said, right, the first thing I'm doing, if I'm Foreign Secretary, I'm going to fly to Berlin, and then to Stockholm, and then to Warsaw, and I'm going to tell the European Union foreign ministers we want a much closer relationship. So I think, and likewise, Rachel's speech on housing targets and planning reform, they talked about all that. But so, and I got, if you listen to the podcast, you'd know I got quite frustrated with the Ming vase strategy at times. But, you've got to judge a campaign by the outcome. And the outcome was a Labour landslide and a huge majority. So, well done them.
Thinking back to Tony Blair's first term, well, you were an integral part of that administration. I mean, Tony Blair has subsequently said that he regrets not being more radical and not using the huge majority that he had to do some more radical things. Do you think that's something that is in Keir Starmer's mind?
It might be. I mean, it's funny, as you know, I don't disagree with Tony that much. I thinking back to that period and especially looking at my diaries at the time, we did a lot. We did a hell of a lot. And I think sometimes Tony, he puts his mind in today and sees some of the big challenges, like, for example, he's kind of rightly obsessed with AI and technological change and how we might adapt to that. And I think he sort of thinks that maybe we should have been thinking about those challenges back then, but those challenges weren't the same then. So I actually don't agree with Tony that we could have done that much more.
Well, for example, you could have joined the euro. And if you had, we wouldn't be out of the EU now.
Yeah.
I mean, that must be something that plays on his mind a bit.
I suspect it does. And also I was thinking when Keir going off to the NATO summit, imagine if we were still in the European Union, what a leadership role Britain would have right now with France in a bit of a mess and Germany a bit of a mess. He might think that, but then the other thing that you know is that, politics isn't always linear. The Euro debate was really, really difficult, and Tony was in one place and Gordon was in another. That's the political reality. I'm not sure we could have persuaded people to back us at that time, even though that was maybe what Tony wanted to do. I think he probably what I think he means by it is that he wishes maybe he'd done more public service reform in the first term, when the focus was very much about money. But I do think this government will be pretty radical in all sorts of different ways that we haven't necessarily thought about yet or heard about yet.
Who's going to be the unexpected star of this government?
It's very hard to know. That's a very good question. Well, who was the unexpected star of 1997, would you say?
God.
Blunkett?
Possibly.
Tessa Jowell? Alan Milburn.
She was a bit of a late developer, wasn't she?
Okay, of the whole period of government. Yeah. Alan Milburn, Alan Johnson. I mean, there's lots of them. I think there is a pretty good team there. I'm a great fan of Peter Kyle.
He was the one. If you had said to me, well, Ian, who do you think? I would have said Peter Kyle.
Yeah. So I think that. But they'll all be tested now. They'll all be tested. When we interviewed Lisa Nandy yesterday, and she was saying, she can't quite believe it that she arrived at DCMS and she was given this pile of papers and it said for decision.
I thought you were going to say pile of free tickets.
Well, she did go to doorbell, I saw that. No, for decision, make decisions. And if all you've known is opposition, she was elected in 2010, all she's known is opposition. So I think it's very, very, very hard to know. But you're right, there will be people who emerge very, very quickly as people think, and it's this point about are you made for government or are you made for opposition? But I think they've started really well.
I was listening back the other day, believe it or not, to an interview I did with you. In fact, I think it may be in the first interview I did with you back in 2011.
What on earth were you doing that for?
For reasons that you don't need to know.
Oh, you're not writing another book, are you?
No.
Okay.
And I remember, I think it was that interview, afterwards, or I may have read it in your diaries, you said, well, I've done this interview with Iain Dale. I feel absolutely terrible. I mean, how are you at the moment?
Oh, I see. I'm fine.
From a mental health...
I see. Yeah.
Because some people listening now may not know that a lot of your diaries about your are about your state of mental health.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to push on through.
Yeah. And so I'd done an interview and you hadn't spotted that?
No, I hadn't.
No. Interesting, yeah. That does still happen. I mean, I'm fine at the moment. I'm pretty good. I'm quite tired. I'm much, much better now at dealing with my own mental health. He says he slept 40 minutes in 2 days. I'm much better at looking after myself physically. I sleep a lot normally. I eat well. I exercise. If I'm getting edgy, I've got lots of different tactics I use now. I don't listen to the news. I listen to music. I don't read the papers. I read books. I connect with people that I may be disconnected with. I've just got all these little tactics that I use. So I'd say I'm in pretty good shape at the moment.
Is that something that, say, 15 years ago you didn't have?
No, I just used to power through, really.
Yeah.
In fact, I wrote one of the other books I wrote about my mental health, which I dedicated to my psychiatrist. I didn't even start to see him till 2005, and he died recently, which was really sad because he was a massive part of my recovery, I guess I'd call it. And also I'd say that what he did was open my mind to it's not just okay to feel bad, it's okay to take medication. I used to hate taking medication, but now I'm absolutely fine with it. So yeah, I'd say I'm in pretty good shape at the moment.
Mike says on a WhatsApp message here, I think Darren Jones is exceptionally capable in his brief and communication to public audience. I agree. I
thought he was terrific as a select committee chair. Yeah. And that's the other thing I think is interesting about Keir Starmer. I think he genuinely points on merit. So he spotted, or the team spotted, that Darren Jones was very, very good as chair of a select committee, and he was very good on detail and very good on numbers. Make him chief secretary, see if he can do it. Darren's definitely pretty good. Listen, there's some very, very good people there. And I also thought, how rare... Can you remember the last time that a newly elected MP... I think he's put 5 newly elected MPs straight into ministerial jobs.
Not a fan of that.
No, I'm sure you're not. And Georgia Gould, who I love to bits, and she's one of them. And I remember when I heard it, I thought, oh God, Bruce Grocott will go mad about that. The old stagers think you've got to do the. But it's I think it's interesting. I think he'll just be trying out new things. That's what I mean about, the radicalism in the end has got to come from policy. But I think he's taken a new approach in all sorts of ways.
But by doing that, you also make a few enemies on the back
benches,
don't you?
For sure.
People who've done the hard yards of opposition and aren't ministers.
Yeah.
Emily Thornbury, we were talking about, is one of them.
Yeah. Is she on your list as well?
She is on my list.
Yeah.
She's a definite contender, Emily. She's got a few things to say.
Yeah, she certainly has. Yeah, I think she could be. I could see you and her getting on pretty well. Yeah.
Anyway, we are going to take your calls in just a few moments' time. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. It's 8:31 with Daryl Jackson with the news headlines.
Detectives in Bristol are searching for a man after suspected human remains were found in 2 suitcases at Clifton Suspension Bridge. Reports of a man acting suspiciously were made just before midnight. Hertfordshire police say they had no prior contact with a murder suspect or the victims of a crossbow attack on Tuesday. The suspect, Kyle Clifford, is in a serious condition in hospital and is still receiving treatment. And the Health Secretary has told LBC sunshine is the best disinfectant after announcing a review into the NHS's performance. Wes Streeting's been speaking as it emerged the waiting list has risen for a second year in a row. LBC weather: rain for Wales and eastern England tonight, a chance of showers in the northwest and along coasts in the southeast, lows of 8 degrees.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
8:34 on LBC. Alastair Campbell is here, about to take your calls. I'm actually going to start with a WhatsApp message from Jen in Wembley. Why do you think the Tories are so obsessed with the culture wars? A question that Iain asked earlier in the week. But I mainly asked that because of Suella Braverman's ridiculous speech
I saw
in
your
Washington.
response. I know, absurd. I think they're obsessed with the culture wars partly because they're sort of just playing along with the media agenda, but also I think it's a substitute for a proper governing strategy. I don't think there was a proper governing strategy. So they have these, again, sorry to keep banging on about the podcast, but Lisa Nandy made the point that she's from Wigan and, MP for Wigan, and she said that, there are one of the statues in Wigan is a Billy Boston, who was one of the first black rugby league players, and he's like a kind of hero in Wigan. And she just felt that they were constantly trying to sort of tap into what they thought were racist buttons to press, and it wasn't working. Anyway, listen, I don't know is the answer. Thankfully, I'm not inside Suella Braverman's head, and I never want to be.
Tyler is in Leeds. Hello, Tyler.
Hey up and good evening. I've got a question. Alastair Campbell, are you hopeful about Keir Starmer's and the Labour Party's devolution agenda? I think that meeting with the regional mayors was sort of a really good sort of a signal to sort of reduce regional divides. And sort of secondly, which is hark on to that, do you wish that, when you were in power last time, you did more on the devolution front for sort of the regions of Britain rather than just the nations? But I think that it's good that devolution is at the forefront of the sort of political agenda, because I think it's good for economic growth and for reducing sort of poverty and bad things like that in society. What do you think?
Well, I totally agree with you. And we did, as I guess the main focus of our devolution programme was the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly that became the Parliament, and some elected mayors. But we also did do the regional development agencies. I remember the one in Yorkshire Forward, which I think was one of the best. And I think one of the worst things the Tory government did was to scrap the regional development agencies. Yeah. And also, if you remember, we tried to get a North East Assembly as well. And we lost the referendum on that. I'm a big supporter of devolution. And again, back to the point I was making earlier to Iain about, one of the first things Keir Starmer was to go to the Four Nations. I thought it was really serious, grown-up politics to say, let's get the mayors in, including Ben Houchen, the Tory. I've had a lot of critical things to say about Ben Houchen, but he made a point of sitting him, at the cabinet table, getting him to speak, listening to him respectfully. And I just think that
it showed cross-party consensus, which is sort of desperately needed at the moment.
Yeah. And I also think that, I know that Sadiq Khan often quotes this thing that, in his equivalent in Tokyo has some sort of say over 70% of all government spending that affects the people of Tokyo. Sadiq Khan in London, it's 7%. You
can see similarly with the cantons in France, Germany, or sort of regional forms of governance in most sort of successful European nations.
Yeah.
We seem to be lacking that in the UK, and I had very low expectations, honestly. I'm an independent, but the fact that devolution was sort of the first things Keir Starmer did made me question my prior assumptions. So,
you might not that we're always electioneering, but you might vote Labour next time.
Maybe. Who knows? We'll see.
Good.
Proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Absolutely
Thank you very much.
Absolutely right.
Tyler, thank you very much indeed. Stuart's a new caller in Canterbury. Hello, Stuart.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Alastair. Love the podcast.
Thank you.
My question is, if your dream came true, Alastair, that all private schools were shut down and banned, what happens to the institutions? What happens to the buildings? What happens to the people, the teachers like myself who work there? I went to a state school, but what's the practical solution?
Well, listen, I wouldn't worry too much that you're not going to get shut down. I think the VAT on school fees is a pretty small change. I mean, as you will know, most people who send their children to private schools have had to cope with some pretty sharp rises in fees in recent years. I just think that partly because our media, a lot of our editors and broadcasters and columnists and opinion formers, because they use the private sector for their own kids, and a lot of them privately educated themselves, I think there's a ridiculously disproportionate focus on the 7% of schools when the 93% of schools don't get the support necessarily that they need. And added to which, you take together the falling birth rate. In the area where I live, in Camden, we've had schools close recently because of lack of demand for those schools. So there are school places available. So I honestly wouldn't worry. Your institution.
Yeah, but if rural parents are going to start sending their kids to schools in Camden, it doesn't really add up. And your argument makes sense for senior schools, definitely. But if you look at the pre-prep situation or even the prep school situation, the vast majority of parents are just going to become completely priced out, and maybe you've just become a complete free market capitalist here.
No,
what an accusation!
No, I don't agree. I think that I suspect that most of the people who use private schools now will continue to do so. Some, I guess, there will be a price effect, and they'll have to go to the state sector. And I think they'll find good schools there. There are many good schools in the state sector. I mentioned my own kid's primary school the other day. Honestly, I would send any kid to the school like that. It's an absolutely brilliant school in a part of London that's got a mixture of affluence and poverty and lots of different nationalities. And no, I look. You rightly said, Stuart, at the start that this was a dream, but it's a dream that I know is never going to happen. But I honestly believe that one of the things that's held this country back historically is the fact that we have this self-perpetuating, very, very small, tight elite that basically education is the key to that. And, I think it's fantastic that we've now got the least privately educated cabinet in our history. One member of that cabinet went to a private school.
Is that right? Only one?
Yeah, I think it's Louise Haig. I think he's the only one, yeah. Which I think is great. And it doesn't mean that they're going to sort of, wage class war against you and your schools and what have you, but it does mean that their focus is hopefully on the 93%.
Well, I think you've got to push for stronger funding for state schools then. I think the 6,500 new teachers isn't enough. I think
that's a start, but that's
half a teacher per school.
I agree. That's a start, though, isn't it? I mean, what they were doing in the campaign, this is what we're saying. And we did the same thing. One of our main pledges was about smaller class sizes, paid for by getting rid of the assisted places scheme. And by the way, Stuart, at the time, all the same arguments were used by the private sector about us getting rid of the assisted places scheme. It was the beginning of the end. It was the thin end of the wedge and all that. I think we'd be a better country if we didn't have a private education, but we do, and it's not going to change. But I think what will change is a government much more focused on the schools than the 93%.
OK, Stuart, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Dave in Fulham. Dave, hi.
Hello there. My question for Alastair is, what advice would he give to David Lammy as the new Foreign Secretary if he has to deal with the Trump administration, given David Lammy's past comments about Trump?
Listen, if Donald Trump becomes president, I think something that David Lammy may or may not have said in the past is not going to be very high up his agenda. Look, if Donald Trump does come back, and I hope to God he doesn't, but if he does, the Labour government, like every other government in the world, will have to deal with the fact that the leader of one of the two most powerful countries in the world is a lying felon, narcissist, who can't be trusted to tell the truth from 1 minute to the next. Yeah. But what they won't do is go out and say that's what he is. And I thought it was very interesting watching Keir Starmer in Washington today with Joe Biden. There are certain rules of diplomacy which, even though Donald Trump breaks them all the time, not least, do you remember when he sort of walked in front of the Queen? I thought that was one of his highlights. But I just think that a Labour government will just have to adapt to that in the same way as you have to adapt to the changes that are going in Europe or any other election. We can't pick other countries' presidents and prime ministers, much as sometimes we might like to.
You know Joe Biden, I think, or you've met him.
Yeah.
What do you think he should do now?
I mean, I really think he's been a good president. I think he's a great guy. I think his heart is in the right place. I think he's a formidable politician with an amazing career behind him. But I found that TV debate pretty terrifying. And the thing I find most terrifying is that because he acted as he did, it means that the Trump and the lying and the horror that he represented, including in that debate, nobody's even talking about it. And I feel it would be best for America and therefore for the world if the Democrat Party somehow, and the Democrat Party is a very, very strange kind of animal. There's no sort of structure in the way that is maybe to our parties. But you know what the exam question is? Who is the best placed to beat Donald Trump? I would say Democrat Party, answer that question. And let's be honest, at the moment, as things stand, although he's got a good record, although he's a great guy, is it really Joe Biden? So I'm surprised really at Jill Biden that she seems to be the one pushing very, very hard for him to stay. I'm surprised she doesn't see that this is sort of pretty demeaning and horrible for him right now.
I think it's just her. I mean, his sister Valerie is I think one, I met her last year, and I mean, a very forceful woman, and I suspect that she is equal to Jill Biden in her influence on him. But none of the families seem to be in that place.
No. But look, we've all known people who get old and you start to see them sort of changing. And very rare that you see them get better. Very see that once you start losing things a bit. And it's sad, but ultimately, we're talking here, we're not talking about, either a small country or a company. We're talking about the United States at risk of having back a felon, a liar, a narcissist, somebody who cares about nothing other than himself, a sort of, a massive version of Boris Johnson. And I think that's just terrible for the world. And that's the responsibility. Now, where I understand where the Bidens are coming from is, one, as I say, he's got a good record. Two, he has shown that he can beat Trump. He can beat Trump. But, Trump should be dead and buried by now, given what he's done.
But it was interesting in that debate that Trump didn't go in for the kill, did he?
No, because
I thought that was quite revealing in itself, that he recognised what was happening.
But I remember when we talked to Hillary Clinton on the podcast, she said that the thing about it, she realised...
Such a name dropper.
I'm sorry, but the Queen was busy that day. But she said that the impression she got when she was doing those debates with Trump was he had this amazing, she called it an animal instinct. And the animal instinct that he picked up around Joe Biden was that Joe Biden was in a bit of trouble, and he let him just sort of go with it. Listen, Trump is a truly repellent human being, and I'm sure David Lammy wouldn't ever say that again. But I think Joe Biden, it can't just be about him, this. And if he genuinely thinks, there are so many people now saying to him, I know people who've been saying to him for months, there's a well-known strategist that's quite close to him. He's been trying to argue him for months that, the best thing is to get out with dignity and honour and find somebody that can beat Trump.
OK, Dave, thank you very much for that. We'll come to more of your calls in just a second. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:49. Alastair Campbell is with us taking your calls. Theo's in Brighton. Hi, Theo.
Hi there. My question is, you were mentioning about an experience with depression earlier. We have a mental health crisis in this country. I experienced anxiety last year after some bereavement and other life stresses. I had some therapy sessions. My GP prescribed me beta blockers, but ultimately I decided I'd go to Peru, where I did an ayahuasca retreat. I did 4 ayahuasca ceremonies, 2 bufo ceremonies, and it was incredible. It freed me, liberated me from anxiety, and there were a lot of other participants there who had similar mental health struggles. Essentially, for people who don't know, ayahuasca, it's been used safely in the Amazon for centuries. You drink, it's a powerful psychedelic, and you do it with shaman, you do it in a maloka, and it puts you into this different state of mind where it includes like vivid dreams that you're awake for, but they're really profound and meaningful, and sort of takes you out almost of this reality into some other sort of conscious space, and you can see life from a new perspective. And when you come back, providing you've done it in the right way and you sort of integrate it, it's really, really life-changing. And there's many sort of veterans and even police officers with trauma. There was an article in the Telegraph recently who are flying to Peru to do this type of treatment, and it's having massive effects. And essentially the active ingredient is DMT. It's endogenous. It's not intoxicating. And, it's not addictive. And there's evidence to show about sort of neuroplasticity, about forming new connections in the brain. And the medical model now is sort of giving out beta blockers for anxiety, SSRIs for depression, that people can't access therapy. And what I would say, if you researched it properly, which Imperial College London are doing with the view to ultimately open government licensed and regulated retreats in the UK, where people can elect to go and do this type of experience to help them in their life, to help them with their sort of well-being, I think it will be revolutionary. I mean, there was a Guardian article a few months ago saying £300 billion in the UK is lost on mental health. That's 12% of this country's GDP. Is available, you would get growth in the economy because it would get people back. You would have people feeling better. I mean, it changed my life, and there's a lot of people talking about it now, and it's changing their lives if it's done properly and done in a safe environment in the right way.
Marion has just sent a text saying this is a topic for Tom Swarbrick. He's all over this stuff, and he actually is.
I know. Well, listen, I know about the Imperial College programme because I did a TV documentary a few years ago about depression, and there's a woman called Ros Watts who ran it, and I couldn't take it because it would have meant coming off my medication, but I followed a guy from Watford who had really, really, really chronic depression, and I watched some of the sessions where he was being administered with these psychedelic drugs. And it was done in very, very safe setting, and Ros was just wonderful with him as a patient. I've forgotten his second name. I know his first name was Iain. And he...
Easily done.
Exactly. Sorry, Mr. Dale. It wasn't Iain Dale. But what was really interesting and sad about it was he said that having been on the programme, which was a trial programme, and because it's a Class A drug, they had to get a special licence to do it, but it was time limited. So in the end, he had to come off, and he said he'd actually had the longest period he'd ever had without really bad depression and anxiety. And as soon as he came off it, it went back. So I'm kind of, listen, I think I'm still too scared myself to try it. I'm probably a bit too small C conservative on this stuff for that. But I'm a big supporter of what the Imperial College are trying to do.
OK, Theo, thank you very much indeed for that. Nikki from Kent and Italy, what a mixture, says, Nikki is a regular correspondent of mine. She hates my views on Brexit.
Right.
She says, Alastair Campbell and James O'Brien are my true heroes who tell the truth about Brexit. And the country is economically and politically and socially damaged by it. So am I personally with my kind Italian husband. Can you try and persuade Iain that this is the situation? 30 seconds.
OK. Listen, Nikki, I agree with you and you agree with me. Iain's one of those people who's totally locked in opinions that he had in the past, and he doesn't want to see the damage that's been done. I suspect once the biometric fingerprinting stuff comes in when we're going through the channel, I think he might his eyes might open. Listen, I think one of the big disappointments for me of the election campaign, we had 3 days on Rishi's wetsuit, we had 3 days on D-Day, we had several days on the betting thing. There was next to no debate about how we're going to fix the mess that Brexit's imposed upon the country. So I'm with you, Nikki.
I could respond.
I know,
we've only got 5 minutes left,
Okay.
so should we move on to something else?
Yeah, go
on. Thank you, Nikki. Rob is a new caller in Southampton. Hello, Rob.
Hiya, Ian and Alastair.
Hello.
I would first like to say thank you for taking my call. And then the question I have is this: I'm a young person from Southampton. I'm 20 years old, and I'm really struggling in finding a way where I can buy a house. And I would like to know what Alastair and Ian as well think the best way in solving this housing crisis is. I'm young. I'm not poor in any means. I do work a job. I work full time. I never went to college. I don't have any debt. I've worked incredibly hard, and I'm still thinking, how am I going to afford a house in the future? What am I going to do? And I'm incredibly involved in politics. I read so much. I listen to podcasts. I read the news every day. I listen to LBC's James O'Brien in the middle of the day every day. I'm probably the most involved person in politics I know. So many of my friends are disassociated with politics because they don't understand and aren't explained to it enough. And they are completely confused, upset and angry. And that is what is leading to this large amount of people voting for reform. And honest with me, it scares me. Why are people voting for such a far-right thing when they don't understand the system and they're so scared because they simply cannot have the luxuries that you put in place in the 90s for young people to buy or rent housing? I just don't know how it's possible.
Well, listen, one of the reasons I'm writing these books for kids and going to schools and stuff is I think we assume that the hard right appeal is to kind of older people who want to sort of, get back to a different sort of Britain that they think they had before. But actually, there's a real danger of the appeal of very, very simplistic populist solutions to the young as well. And, your point about housing, I think we've got honestly, if you listen to Rachel Reeves' speech, I think she did set out certainly the ambition in terms of house building. I think that we've allowed the housing debate to be trapped between two poles. One is Margaret Thatcher sold off lots of council houses and wasn't that a great thing. That's what the Tories say. And that's still got a massive hole. And we haven't built up enough social housing. We haven't built enough affordable housing, and we've got to do more of both. And then at the other end, this kind of obsession with property prices, particularly in the southeast, as though it's a sort of, virtuous game. And I think we've got to get back to a debate that is about, everybody ought to have the right to a decent place to live. And sometimes that means intervening in the market in a way that, neither of the main parties have frankly wanted to do. Ian, you wanted your ideas too.
Two things. Obviously, the answer is to build more houses. I mean, that's as clear as night follows day. But there are other things that can be done here. We did an hour on this last night, actually, Rob. Listen back on Global Player. One of the things that came out of that was that I don't understand why in this country we don't build so-called Hofhäuser that they use in Germany. I mean, because we refer to them as prefabs, which reminds people of the war, and so obviously they're bad things. Well, they're actually quite luxurious, a lot of them. And they are a third of the cost of building a normal house in this country. So that's one thing. And I think there's all sorts of things that can be done to encourage small and medium-sized house builders to get back into the market in a meaningful way. We can't rely on the huge house builders all the time. There ought to be incentives for the kind of builders that will build, let's say, a street of 10 houses or something. They're the key to this. It can't be just left to all of the big boys. But we've got time for one more question. Rob, thank you very much. Let's go to Nigel, who is in Hornchurch. Hello, Nigel.
Oh, good evening, Ian and Alastair. We're about a week after the general election, about a week after the 2015 general election. I was up at the House of Parliament with my junior school class and noticed about 6 of them had gone missing. On backtracking, I found them having cornered Ed Miliband and were berating him for having lost the general election. Children get politics. Yeah. I've been sort of teaching it to junior school children for 15 years or more. They get it, they understand it, they love it. And I'm just wondering if I could ask Alastair why he feels that schools are afraid to teach it.
Because of the opening themselves to the accusation that they're being political. So, for example, quite often when I go to schools, the head teacher will feel that he or she has to tell the parents that I'm coming in and will say that, you know, he's coming in to explain politics rather than to explain that people should vote Labour, because they fear that it'll be kind of misrepresented. I think we've just got to get over that. Where is your school, Nigel?
Yes. Well, actually, I retired just a couple of years ago, but this was in Romford, and so that was sort of... It was fairly staunchly conservative, but having said that, it was taught as sort of democracy and politics. And
was it primary or secondary?
This was primary. This was year 6, 10, 11-year-olds.
Well, listen, Nigel, I'll tell you, I've got a friend who wants to be nameless, but he's bought loads and loads and loads of my books on condition that I send them into schools where I think they'll get a good home. So if you let the producer know what that school is, and I will send a load of books to them.
Alastair, can't say fairer than that. Thank you very much indeed for joining us over the last hour.
Pleasure.
We will do this again sometime soon, hopefully.
Hope so.
And good luck with the book.
And good luck with finding a podcast partner.
Yeah, I know. We'll see if we can.
Now that I've turned you down.
Yeah. We can't have another Two Blokes podcast at this stage. These things don't work, do they? Right, coming up in the next hour, here's a very strange thing. Same-sex couples wanting to adopt have risen by 50% in the last decade. Straight couples, on the other hand, wanting to adopt have fallen by 50%. Now, I can't understand